And we're going to get straight on with the Doomsday Clock.
Well, the press release from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and it reads 90 seconds to midnight. We're told this is the closest it's ever been to Armageddon. That's basically what it signifies there. It's time to look at the clock closer, they're saying, because there's an unprecedented danger. Russia-Ukraine war pushes iconic Doomsday Clock closest to midnight ever in its history. Why is this? Well, it's because of all this sort of casual talk of nuclear exchanges and limited nuclear exchanges and so forth. Nobody seems to be climbing down or talking about peace negotiations, ceasefires. That's all off the table right now. So the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists traditionally will get together and calculate all of these risk factors. Okay, they also put climate change in there and the risk of, disinformation and disruptive technology. So there's a lot of questionable stuff that goes into their calculus. But on the issue of nuclear war and conflict, it's pretty straightforward, and they've been using the same methodology really since their founding. And I have a hard time arguing with their conclusion on this.
It certainly is escalating quite significantly, and we're going to come on later on to what the Russian response to the tank issues has been, and it's getting pretty dangerous. And my question, Patrick, is where's the anti-war lobby in the West? Where is it? It's just disappeared.
It's disappeared. So what should be the anti-war lobby, what used to be on the left, unfortunately, they sort of gradually got groomed into supporting overseas conflicts like the proxy war against Syria, and ignoring things like the war in Yemen and all of these other conflicts which we've been sponsoring, and of course Libya. So they managed to gaslight, I think, the left, and so it's not even there. It's non-existent now. And then they got sucked into the church of the branch Covidians for the last 3 years, and as soon as the COVID crisis subsided, boom, came the Ukrainian crisis. But the support for Ukraine is really built on the back of a Russiagate hoax that's been going on now for 6 years, but really started with the election of Donald Trump. So all that animus, all that bad energy and hate for Russia and support for Ukraine is really built off of that lie. So I think we have a deep psychological condition in the West. I think it's a crisis of morality. It's a crisis of intellect and ethics. And I think Western civilization is at its lowest ebb, maybe in modern history, if you consider what people talk about and say, and everyone has their truth, and this is my truth, my opinion. No one really wants to look at the objective facts of the situation.
Yeah,
so they're panicking.
Yes, well, I'm not going to let Britain off with what you just said there, because of course Russiagate, you're absolutely right to highlight that, but of course that was driven partly from the UK through Richard Dearlove,
Christopher
Steele and so on, but coming off the back of an entire decade of propaganda and gaslighting with the Integrity Initiative and the Russia report and all this stuff, absolutely sourced in the UK. So let's have a look at some more gaslighting here from Defence Intelligence and their latest update on what's going on in Ukraine. Over the last 6 days, they say Russian online commentators have claimed Russian forces have made significant advances, breaking through Ukrainian defenses in 2 areas, and they're talking about Zaporizhia and Donetsk. And Russian units, they say, have probably conducted local probing attacks near Orikhiv and Volodar, but it's unlikely that Russia has actually achieved any substantive advances. And they say that there is a realistic possibility that Russian military sources are deliberately spreading misinformation in an effort to imply that the Russian operation is sustaining momentum. And of course, this nonsense is being amplified by the mainstream press without any criticism or critical thought.
This just smacks of desperation, Mike. So the intelligence services are putting out, or the DOD's putting out what's Russia's probably spreading false rumors about how well they're doing on the field. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the DOD says or what Russia says. The facts on the ground are the facts on the ground. And the problem, Mike, the problem in Britain and the problem in some European countries is they have blocked out and censored any other news sources other than Western ones about this conflict. So that means everybody in the West is in the dark. And if you believe that all the Western mainstream reporting is factual and not biased and not propagandized, not heavily propagandized, and you think all the Russian reporting or Serbian reporting or Hungarian reporting is somehow inaccurate, and Putin's propaganda. Well, the facts on the ground are the facts on the ground, and how things are proceeding in Ukraine, I'm afraid, is not going to be affected by what the British DoD is putting out as their interpretation of the conflict, and the same goes for the United States. In fact, in the United States, they don't even have this conversation.
Right.
They're just completely washed up in all these sort of razzmatazz of CNN weapons porn that they're doing right now with the Abrams tanks and all of these sort of procurements and things for Zelensky.
Okay, so let's move over to the United States. And Victoria Nuland, who was giving evidence, if you could call it that, to a Senate committee, she was being questioned by Rand Paul and had this to say: in the context of Russia's decision to negotiate seriously withdraw its troops from Ukraine and return territories, I would certainly support the easing of sanctions. So what are they saying here? Well, unfortunately, this narrative is no different to what was being said in March last year. So this is what Victoria Nuland said in March 2022. The sanctions will end if Putin ends this war and helps rebuild Ukraine and reestablishes peace and recognizes the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity and right to exist. So lots of press suggesting that this is a step forward, perhaps, that the US saying that they would reduce sanctions in return for certain commitments from the Russian side. But in fact, the narrative is exactly as it was, just restating something that already existed.
You know, so her statements, what Victoria News, this is a typical tactic. I like to call this the Israeli negotiation tactics. They say, well, we've offered you a good deal, just withdraw from every inch of what used to be Ukrainian territory. And if you do that, then we'll have a ceasefire and we'll have some peace negotiations and everything will be great. But it precludes any peace negotiations, Mike. That's the irony of Victoria Nuland's statement. So that's just the party line. That is where they're going on strategy for messaging, which is that Russia has to withdraw. This is what Zelensky's saying. It's what Nuland's saying. It's what all the Western punditry is saying as well. And of course, that's not going to happen. So guess what? Ergo, there's going to be no peace negotiations, and the war will continue as scheduled and ramp up all the weapons transfers and all the rest of it. So this is not anything that I think is productive, but it's just a placeholder. And you'll see them repeat the same thing periodically, and that's so that people in the West, governments, and politicians can look like they're doing something, or they're pushing the process along, but they're not pushing anything along, actually.
So speaking of sanctions, let's introduce you to Spacety. This is a Chinese organization with a subsidiary in Luxembourg. Let's bring up who they are. They say they are a global new space company specialized in small satellites and satellite-based services, and so on. So why are we mentioning them? Well, the US has decided to sanction them for allegedly providing satellite imagery to Ukraine. So we better put the sanctioned
or to Russia imagery.
No, this is
to Ukraine.
No, to Wagner Group. We're operating in Ukraine. Sorry, yes, just
Wagner
to clarify
Group.
Yes, sorry. It was just the report was a bit less than accurate there. So anyway, they are among 16 what are described as entities which have been given sanctions by the Treasury Department. So they have offices, as I say, in Beijing and in Luxembourg, and of course Wagner has been operating since the beginning in Ukraine and has been allegedly receiving satellite imagery from this company. But this is a pretty spectacular development, I think, Patrick, because the sanctions are now being extended to Chinese companies. Now, we've seen that sanctions extended to Iran, but Iran's been on the sort of hit list for US aggression for quite a long time. And this is, I think, is to my knowledge, the first time they have, at least with respect to Ukraine, imposed sanctions on a Chinese company, effectively extending the pressure on the other big target.
So this just happened. So this is coming at the exact time that the Western law enforcement agencies are now, and the U.S. Treasury wants to now categorize the Wagner Group, or Wagner Group, depending on how you pronounce it. It's a Russian private military company as a international terrorist organization. So put those two things together, this satellite sanction story. So they're saying this Chinese company is effectively helping a terrorist group. So this is the sort of hyperbole that the U.S. is known for. They called WikiLeaks an international hostile foreign intelligence services, and that justified the superseding indictments against Julian Assange. That was Mike Pompeo running point on that. So this is interesting. The other thing, Mike, it does is it extends the battlefield into space, and that's significant. So what the West is effectively saying is we're allowed to scan the Earth and use satellite imagery and keep our assets up there to relay intelligence and reconnaissance information, but Russia and China are not. And so this is the direction we're heading. You know where this leads, don't you, Mike? This leads to shooting up in the lower Earth orbit and upper Earth orbit. This is where it's eventually going to end.
Yes, well, it's something they've been, NATO and so on have been talking about for quite a long time now.
Yeah.
But this takes us on to Zelensky.
Zelensky, well, he gave an incredible interview with I think this was with Sky News, but they rebroadcast it. I'm not sure who did the original, but he was asked about would he speak to Vladimir Putin,